Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar. It's on Sunday, February the 9th, 2020. For those of you watching a repeat screening, we'd like to go through the new complete pedigree maps feature of IWDB. We introduced that just a month ago, and it's brand new to most people. So we haven't really seen much of that previously. My name is Per Arne Flatberg. I live in Norway, and here I am with my dog Haggis. I'll be your host today, and if you have any questions at all, if there's anything that's unclear, if you don't understand my language, if I speak too fast, whatever, please ask a question in the comment field on Facebook and we'll get back to you. Okay, so today's agenda. We'll start with a few words about the Irish Wolfhound database. A lot of you have been following us for a number of years and know all these things already, but some of you are new and you are very welcome. Then we'll talk a bit about genetics and contribution. We'll have a look at some breed history and then look at complete pedigree maps and their use. We'll start with a few words about the Irish Wolfhound database. We are a database that's free and open for all users, whether they're breeders or owners or just interested. You're very welcome to use the database. We launched almost 4 years ago in March 2016. For us, it feels much longer ago, but it really is only just 4 years. Right now, we have more than 164,000 hounds in the database. We estimate that about 96 to 98% of all wolfhounds that ever lived are registered in the database. That's the registered wolfhounds. There are a number of countries where wolfhounds aren't necessarily registered, and we don't include those dogs that never entered the breed registry. About 96% of all these, again, have complete pedigrees going back to the breed founders. We have a lifespan of more than 8,000 hounds, more than 12,000 pictures, and more than 12,000 health checks. A few more words. We are run by volunteers. We have a great admin crew who works tirelessly to make this available for you. We are financed by the work group and our users. And our users are main contributors of data. We are an international work group with people from both Europe and the US who are working on a daily basis with the database. So without further ado, let's dig into today's topic. And one of the central terms when it comes to complete pedigree maps is contribution. And the way we talk about contribution is the chance that any expressed trait is inherited from a certain ancestor. For parents, that will be 50%. One dog will have 50% chance of inheriting a trait from the father and 50% from the mother. For grandparents, it's 25%, great-grandparents, 12.5%, and so on. And when we get to generation 10, the chance is only 0.1% that a certain trait is inherited from that ancestor. But as you have seen in a lot of pedigrees, dogs tend to repeat in the pedigree, and multiple appearances will increase chances of that particular trait being expressed in offspring. So there are multiple advantages and disadvantages to this. We have seen a lot of repeat use of dogs in pedigrees, especially previously, when the breed was resurrected about 100, 120, 150 years ago. We used repeat dogs in the pedigree, line breeding or inbreeding, to fixate certain traits. And when we talk about fixating traits, we talk about a trait that's inherited from both the sire and the dam and leads to what is called homozygosity for that trait. is usually done through some kind of inbreeding or line breeding. It has certain advantages because we are able to get quite quickly to a result. There are also certain disadvantages. First of all, it will fixate all traits, not just the required ones. It will eventually fix traits in the population and give enormous influence to certain ancestors of current puppies and make it impossible to breed away from certain problems or from certain ancestors. So that's basically an introduction to how we define contribution, which we'll see a lot of later on. To understand how some ancestors become very influential, it's quite useful to look at breed history. This graph shows the development of the world population of Irish wolfhounds from 1910 through 2019. And as you can see, at the very low left, in 1910, there weren't many Irish wolfhounds in the world. Then we had a surge of population from about 1920 until the Second World War, or right before that. Then the population dropped again during the war and was quite stable until we had an explosion around 1965, which more or less terminated in 1996, where the population started to drop again. In this period, we can see some very influential ancestors showing up. In 1926, a dog called Solemstead Concara had his first litter. All in all, he had 18 litters in 4 years, from 1926 through 1929. And in 2019, his average contribution in all litters worldwide was 17.4%. And that's somewhere between the contribution expected from a grandparent and a great-grandparent. That's from a dog that lived 90 years ago. Moving on, around 1943, a dog called Clonboy Overall was used especially in the UK. At that time, a lot of wolfhounds sadly had to die because there wasn't enough food to feed them, and the living conditions was very harsh. So the population dropped steeply from the end of the 30s until the end of the Second World War. And that's the main reason that Clonboy Overall, who only had 9 litters, is a very influential ancestor for all hounds today. Then in the beginning of the 1950s, a dog called Sanctuary Rory of Gijón was imported to the UK from USA. And he was imported because of Clonboy Overall, whose contribution was getting so immense that it was impossible to breed away from him. They were on the brink of extinction in the UK and had to bring in some new blood, and that was Rory. Rory was bred quite significantly across kennels in the UK and in Ireland. He had 15 litters over the 5 years he was active. Okay, somebody lost the sound. Hope you can all hear me. Okay, sound here is fine, says Tina. So check your computers. Sorry about that. Rory was used quite extensively, and as you can see after him, the population of Irish wolfhounds exploded worldwide, and that's the main reason his contribution today is 26.3% on average, and that's a more significant hound in most pedigrees than the grandparents of the hound. Finally, I'd like to point out to this dog, Eagle Scraggly Sunder. He is currently the last dog that's a complete breed bottleneck. All hounds today are related to Eagle Scraggly Sunder, and he was active from 1977 through 1983, producing 27 litters in those 7 years. You can see his breed contribution is lower than the previous ones. It's only at 6.6%, which is still quite high. And that's mainly because there were so many hounds being bred at that time. So that was like a very short introduction to some of the main breed bottlenecks in our breed. We'll switch over to another screen and take a look at some pedigrees. I thought I'd work with my own dog. This is Amboleo Marksbay and his pedigree. And the pedigree map feature is available right here. If I go into that, we'll find a number of interesting things happening here. We'll start at the very top, and it's quite discreet, but you can see that the number of unique ancestors in his pedigree is listed here. Is 2,461, and that's the number of hounds that are available in his complete pedigree back through the 70 generations we have available. So is 2,461 a large number or a small number? It's a bit below the average, which is at 2,800 something from hounds born in 2016 when he was born. It varies a lot from about 1,800 to more than 4,000, but it all depends on the background inbreeding of the dog. Furthermore, we can see that his pedigree goes back a full 70 generations, but is not complete all the way back there. We'll look at that later on. If you scroll down a bit, we can see the breed contribution. And as most of you probably know, when the Irish Wolfhound was resurrected 150 years ago, there were 5 other breeds that were used to resurrect the breed. It was the Mastiff, the Borzoi, the Tibetan Hound, the Great Dane, and the Scottish Deerhound. What we have done in this graph is to try to visualize the influence of dogs that were registered as certain breeds in today's hound. And you can see that the influence of the Scottish Deerhound is still at 6.39% in his pedigree. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that there's a 6.39% chance that a specific deerhound trait may show up in him. Deerhounds are quite like wolfhounds, but there are differences. It might be more interesting to look at the Great Dane, where there are more differences than with the wolfhound, especially when it comes to coloring and the overall type of hound. And you can see there's still a chance that coloring from Great Danes or maybe body shape or type will show up in today's wolfhounds. It's at 1.7% in his pedigree. We'll move a bit on and have a look at the tail lines. Some of you are very familiar with the tail line and some not so much. But the tail line is used to describe the whole line going back only through the maternal or the paternal side. So look at the first line here in the maternal tail line. This is our dog's dam, and here's her dam again, and her dam, and her dam, all the way back to the very first one that we have here, which is Juno number 15. What's interesting with maternal tail lines is that they are the only way to inherit something called mitochondrial DNA. It's only inherited from mother to daughter, or from mother to son as well, but the son cannot bring it on. So it's a strictly maternal part of DNA. There is some research that indicates that the maternal tail line is carrying vital information for longevity, which will we hope that we'll be able to do a research project on that later on. And where there are only 3 maternal grandmothers, or whatever we can call them, Juno number 15, which is here, is by far the most popular one. In a similar way, we have the paternal tail line, which is only the sire of the sire of the sire of the sire, all the way back to the first one. It carries less influence than the maternal tail line. The next one is just a quick chart to remind you of the influence of each ancestor or contribution of each ancestor in which generation. You can see it's the same thing I showed you earlier on in this presentation. Then we get to the good part. This is the actual pedigree map where we can see all the ancestors going back to from the most influential to the least influential. Of course, we are starting with the parents. In the first column, we have the number. Then we have the name of the hound, the country where it's born, and the year it's born. The next column shows occurrences in pedigree. On the top line is the total number of occurrences. In the bottom line, on the blue background, is the number of occurrences on the paternal side. And in the pink box, the number of occurrences on the maternal side. Then we have the contribution, as we talked about earlier on. It's 50% from the parents. We have the number of the generations where the dog appears. Then the breed and certain remarks, which we'll see later on. And in this dog, it's quite normal from the parents here, number 1 and 2, the grandparents, numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then you'll see as the 7th most influential hound in his pedigree is Sanctuary Rory of Gijón, who was born almost 70 years ago. You'll see that he appears 43,000 times in his pedigree. It's 29,000 times on the paternal side and almost 14,000 times on the maternal side, which gives him a contribution of 24.88%. What you'll see here is that he appears from generation 10 through 25. And that means that in a normal pedigree, you wouldn't actually spot him, but still he's so very influential on this particular hound. And next you'll see another old friend, Clonboy of Oberon, at 21.24%, and as number 10, Solebstead Concara. And these 3 hounds are basically in the top 15 of every hound alive today. So they are fixated in the population, and it's impossible to breed away from them, unless somebody has frozen semen from before 1950, which I very much doubt. It wasn't invented or popular back then. If you browse further down, we will see some incredible numbers. If you look at Monsey, which is Muster's Monsey, at number 18, he was a Scottish Deerhound. He was a breed founder, and he was born in 1875. He appears 40 billion times in our dog's pedigree. And these numbers sound incredible, and when I first saw them, I really had to double check the math behind it, but it's true. When we get back to number of generations we are here, dogs appear lots and lots and lots of times, millions of times in each generation. We can go further down and we'll see it as back here as number 20 through 28, 27 are the great-grandparents with an influence of 12.5%. And then we have a number of other dogs. And when we get far down on the list, at number 126 is the great-great-grandparents. So we can see there's a number of historic dogs that have a higher contribution to this dog than the great-grandparents or the great-great-grandparents, which is interesting when you look at the pedigree, and especially interesting when you try to use their influence as the only measurement. I'll go back up to the top again. I'm sorry about the scrolling. I know it's irritating to watch. I said earlier on that these historic hounds, like Sanctuary Rory of Gijón and Clonboy of Oberon, are impossible to breed away from. their influence will be more or less fixed at approximately this level in all future of Irish wolfhounds. What we can do something about is try to prevent that others get the same influence in the future. So when I'm looking at potential breedings, I would look for dogs that have a high influence but are quite recent. So if we look at number 9 here, we'll see there's Captain of Chantemont, who appears 18 times and has an influence of almost 18%, and Fingal of Nutstone down here as number 12, and then Cillian Rain down here as number 17. And before I go further, Bridget Wondrup has a question. She doesn't understand billions of times influence when there are not billions of Irish wolfhounds. Please clarify, and I'll be happy to. It's true, there hasn't been billions of wolfhounds. There has only been 164,000 something. But when we look at the complete map here, and I'll scroll at the far end of this page, you will see a table of the potential ancestors. And if we look, for instance, at generation number 30 here, there's a possibility of 1 billion ancestors in that generation alone. For each 10 generations, that will multiply by 1,000 times. So when we get to generation 40, there's a potential of 1 trillion possible ancestors. And generation 50, that would be 1 quadrillion ancestors. So when I'm talking about billions of appearances, it doesn't mean there are billions of hounds, just that a hound appears billions of times in a certain pedigree. We'll get back to that further on as well. I hope that answered your question, Bridget. If not, just ask again. So I talked about these 3 dogs that are quite influential, but are a bit away in the pedigree. Captain of Chantemont appears first in generation 5 and then through generation 8. Fingal of Nutstone appears in generations 5 through 7, and Cillian Rain in generations 6 through 9. So I can make choices here. I can either choose to line breed on them, or I can choose to try to breed away from them. And we'll have a look at both ways right now. So what I have done is to do an advanced search of the database. Right here, you'll see I'm asking for any dogs that's not related to Fingal of Nutstone, not related to Cillian Rain, not related to Captain of Chantemont, which is female and born after 2014. And what I do get is a list of 998 dogs available, which fulfill all these criteria. So what I'm looking for now is a bitch that's not related to any of the 3 most influential modern hounds in my dog's pedigree, and I get this list. From this list, I cheated a bit and picked one bitch earlier on, which is wonderful Miranda de la Bassa Pavesa. And she, of course, has her own pedigree and pedigree map. I can look at that and see, okay, are there any influential ancestors here? Oh, this is interesting. She's got Solemstead Max quite high up on the list. Max is also a breed bottleneck. He's in all pedigrees these days. He's much more influential in Miranda's pedigree than in my hound's pedigree. But I don't see any of the dogs that I try to find or try to avoid, which is good. It means it all works. So what I did was to create a trial breeding of these 2 hounds. I used the trial mating functions, entered the hounds there, and got this trial mating here. And if I go into the pedigree map, we can see what's happening if we try to mate these two. So what we see here is that this is basically more or less an outcross. We have Rory here, as expected. His influence is quite high, higher than in the dog we started with. That's because Miranda has him as a very influential ancestor. And then we can go on. We have Clonboy Oberon, we have Solomsted Max, and we have Concara. But what we'll see is that there's actually no common ancestors going on here, which are modern. We'll have to scroll way, way, way down to find any modern ancestors with a high influence in this breeding, at least when it comes to influence that comes from both sides, both the sire and dam side. I believe that we can scroll all the way down somewhere here, and we'll find maybe some hounds at or about 6% influence or contribution, which are influential. I won't waste time on that. The other way of doing this is, of course, to go the other way around and say, okay, I want to line breed on these three hounds. So what I have done now is to search for the bitches that have Cillian Ruane, Captain of Shantamon, and Fingal of Nutstone in the pedigree, which are born after 2014, are female. And just to narrow it down, I selected the Scandinavian countries, and I found 589 results for that. Again, I picked a potential breeding partner, which is really Irish Heureka, which was born in Denmark 2.5 years ago. Her pedigree map will look quite similar to what we looked at, hopefully. You'll see there's one dog here, Ascending Spiron, that's been line bred on in this breeding. But we also will find these Irish hounds that we look for at least somewhere down in the pedigree. So we'll look at the trial mating and that pedigree map again. And what we can see here, when it shows up, it takes a bit of time to calculate these pedigree maps. It goes through thousands and thousands of hounds. So hopefully we'll get it very soon. Here we are. So what I tried to do is to see, or I tried to line breed on these Irish hounds, and we'll see if we can find them somewhere near the top. Let's have a look for Captain of Shantamon. He's number 42 on the list, and the others are around the same area. So what's happening here? Well, although the bitch is related to these hounds, they're not very influential there. So when we try to line breed from my hound and this bitch, we instead ended up line breeding on some other hounds. We'll see a bit further down. Oh, here's Cloak and Killian. We have these hounds that we expected. We have Ascending Spiron here, which was influential in the dam. And if we look further down, we have Pier of Nutstone here. Old Torum, which appears 300 billion times. And let's see if we can find some modern hounds. He's Captain of Shantamon. He's number 42, so we have actually decreased his influence by doing this. So this gives interesting insight into what will happen if we do these trial matings and what we can expect of influence from certain hounds. Here's one, Wolf of Rhapsody in blue, turns out on both sides of the pedigree and with a quite high contribution. Okay, you can all play with this and try to understand what's going on. I'll just briefly talk about this word, founder, which is used throughout here. We have 69 breed founders in the Irish Wolfhound. And a founder is a hound which was used to create an Irish Wolfhound, and where we don't have ancestry of that particular dog. Or it might be, in this case, a Great Dane, which is used to mate with something else and create an Irish Wolfhound. And you can see this founder showing up all the time. Okay, I'll scroll down to the very bottom again and get back to what Bridget asked about earlier on, because it's an illustration of what's technically called a pedigree collapse, where at some point, quite early on when it comes to wolfhounds, but it's the same for humans or any other species, at some point you will end up getting more entries in the pedigree than there were animals that ever lived. So this is a way to try to find out how and where does that happen, and how many distinct hounds do we have in each pedigree out of the possible hounds, but also where are the founders first occurring. So we'll start with generation 1, which are the parents. There are two occurrences in the pedigree from two distinct hounds, of course, the sire and the dam. And it's, of course, only possible to have one sire and one dam. So that's 100% existing, 2 out of 2. And it's the same way through generation 4. We have 16 distinct hounds in generation 4 out of 16 possible. But in generation 5, there's one hound that appears twice. So we only have 31 distinct hounds there out of possible 32. And of course, that gap will widen when we get further down the pedigree. So when we get to generation 10, for instance, there could be 1,024 possible hounds, but only is 453. So that's one thing that's happening. When we get back here to generation 17, we hit upon the first founder in the breed. You can see there could be 131,072 entries in the pedigree at that time, but there is only 131,052, so 20 is missing. And that's just because the first founder in the pedigree shows up there. It's Sildarian of Culafin, who lived in the 1930s in England. And what you'll see as we get further down is that the gap widens. When we get to generation 40, we only have 341 billion hounds out of possible 1 quadrillion hounds. And it's not distinct hounds, it's just entries in the pedigree. The number of hounds listed here is only 577. And as we move down, the numbers become quite ridiculous. I think this in generation 70 is called 1 septillion hounds. The number is mind-bogglingly high. But that's the way it goes. If we could go further back, this number of potential hounds in the pedigree would grow and grow and grow. For wolfhounds, we exhausted the number of possible Irish wolfhounds somewhere around generation 17. So after generation 17, there were more Irish wolfhounds in the pedigree than has ever lived. So that means we have to have repeat hounds in the pedigree, otherwise it would be quite impossible, right? I see some. It was easy to understand when we went through this, so that was great, Bridget, and for the others. Okay, so that's more or less what I wanted to talk about. I'll just ask for some money. If you'd like, please donate to the Irish Wolfhound database. through paypal.me/IWDB or the donate button on every Pedigree page. We are dependent on your contributions. If you want to contribute data, whether it's missing hounds or dates of death or cause of death, whatever, please do so. We are very, very grateful for every contribution of data. You can do it on the Pedigree page or just email to info@iwdb.org. If there's any more questions, I'm happy to hang around and answer those. But please be quick so we don't keep people hanging around here unnecessarily. Anyway, you are always free to play with this feature and with the other features of IWDB. We know there's lots of uses on a daily basis, and we are very, very grateful that you find the tool useful. And as I said, we are very grateful for your contributions. Okay, I'll round up now. If there's no more questions, please feel free to drop us an email if there's something you're wondering